Who wouldn't want to be a Roman soldier? Eh? I defy any of the lads in here who at one time or other haven't imagined being a Roman soldier. Well, tonight, what I'm going to try to do is to be a Roman soldier. Now, apparently there's men still dress up as Roman soldiers these days. They're doing battle enactments and such like. I'm not going quite that far in my research. But if I was being true to form, I would have my notes on wax tablets here tonight, somebody passing them across to me. And I'd be speaking to you in Latin, which means hardly anybody would understand what I'm saying, let alone me, which would be a waste of time. So I want to read one verse with you, and then I'm going to take on the persona, if you like, of the Roman Centurion, of who we're going to read about just here now. And it's found in the Gospel of Mark. It's found in other Gospels too. Chapter 15 and verse 39. And this is at the crucifixion site where Jesus and the two thieves had been crucified. Verse 39 says this: So when the centurion who stood opposite him saw that he cried out like this and breathed his last, he said, Truly, this man was the Son of God. So, bear with me as I share the centurion's story. I am a soldier of Rome, and this is my story of the day that changed the world. I'd been stationed in Judea for about 9 months. How I remember the night before the boat sailed from Ostia, as I shared with my colleagues where I was next going to be posted, to Judea. How they laughed, how they mocked me. What did you do wrong? Did you lose a standard in the field of battle to get a posting like that? Nothing but dust and sand, relentless sunshine, and all the locals, every man, woman and child, hate your guts. Always looking down their noses at you. Always saying their God, because they only have one, is going to raise someone up and he's going to kick you Romans right back to where you belong, right out of their country. Anyway, most of what they said was actually true. From the moment they arrived in Caesarea, that's the way it was. And then, here I was in Jerusalem. I remember the day before, my prefect called me to his tent and told me, right, your lads, they're going to be on execution duty tomorrow. It was going to take place outside the city walls of Jerusalem, in a place called Golgotha, or a place of the skull, as some knew it. Straightforward enough. There'll only be 3 people being executed. A couple of thieves, and likely that murdering troublemaker Barabbas. Barabbas. I wouldn't mind driving the spikes into his hands myself, I thought. We'd have to be on our guard, though. Jerusalem was bursting at the seams. Pilgrims had travelled from all over the place to celebrate another one of their infernal celebrations. This one was called the Passover. We'd been told if there was likely to be an uprising, it was likely to be centred around this particular feast. Something to do with the Hebrews from years before, how their God had brought them out of slavery in Egypt, inflicting all manner of plagues on the Egyptians before destroying the Egyptian army in the Red Sea. Stories, I thought. I hadn't seen much evidence of the Hebrew God here since I arrived. Perhaps he turned his back on them. I wouldn't blame him. The following morning, a couple of hours before dawn, my Optio, my second in command, presented his report on the century's strength. Out of 80 men, 6 were in the infirmary, following scuffles with Hebrews of Barabbas' ilk. 3 might be expected to rejoin the legion. And then 5 more reporting ill this morning. Sore heads, upset stomachs apparently, as he presented the empty wineskin to me. Oh, I see. Well, hopefully a month of digging latrines on half rations and half pay. We'll soon have those boys back fighting fit. Then we made our way out to the place of execution. It was about an hour before the dawn, so we could make sure there was no surprises, prepare the ground, prepare the sockets for where the crosses will be plummeted into a few hours later. And we awaited the arrival of the condemned men. In the early part of the morning, we could hear the cacophony of noise and shouts coming from the city. For a moment, I was beginning to wonder, had the uprising started? Something was going on. What was going on? Then a runner came from the city. Slight change, sir, he said. Still 3 prisoners. But the governor, he's released Barabbas. What? What was he thinking? Releasing Barabbas? Well, I presume there's a more notable prisoner taking his place. Oh, yes, sir. It's the King of the Jews. Who? Do you mean Herod? No, sir. Another man. It's Jesus of Naboth or something. Nazareth's son. Jesus of Nazareth. Is that who you mean? Yes, sir. That's the one. I couldn't believe my ears. Then he handed me an inscription. It said upon it, King of the Jews. It was written in Latin and Greek and some other language, I presume to be the Hebrew language. Governor said that's to be nailed to his cross, sir. You should have seen it, sir, he continued. The Hebrews, they've finally come to their senses. They were crying out. They had no king but Caesar. And they were shouting that the governor should crucify their king. Straightforward execution, I thought. The lads were briefed to be extra vigilant. We were executing their king, after all. What sort of people want you to kill their king? Jesus of Nazareth? Wasn't it he that only days ago had entered Jerusalem? The people singing his praises, throwing their cloaks and palm leaves before him, singing Hosanna in the highest. Wasn't he supposed to be their great hope? I'd heard the story about one of my fellow centurions calling upon this man when one of his valued servants had been gravely ill. Jesus was going to attend his house, but my colleague had said he wouldn't hear of it. He wasn't worthy. Just say the word, Lord. And he did. And when he returned to his house, his servant was healed. And it was just at the time that Jesus had said so. His faith had been rewarded. And here we were. We were going to crucify this man. It was about the 3rd hour, and then I seen the escort detail leave the gate and make their way toward us. The prisoners carrying the beams of wood that their hands would soon be pinned to. As they approached, I saw 4 figures. Was Barabbas among them after all? 3 with beams, and then another staggering from side to side, being buffeted, and it would seem that most of the abuse was being centred upon him. As he approached and got closer and approached the place where I stood, I could hardly believe my eyes. This man, for it was Jesus, was barely recognisable as a man at all. Such had been the savagery of the beating he had received at the hands of Roman soldiers, Herod's men of war, and even those people in the crowd accompanying them to their deaths. A thick crown of eastern thorn had been woven by someone and pressed into his head, the long, cruel thorns piercing his brow. I was speechless for a moment before I heard my Optio's voice. "Sir?" "Right, lads, let's make this quick. No dilly-dallying. Get those beams in place and get the prisoners pinned and secured and these crosses raised up and in their sockets before we have women and children and do-gooders getting in the way and trying to prevent us doing our duty." As the nails were driven home, I waited for the cries for mercy, the cursing from the condemned men. The two thieves didn't disappoint. But Jesus was strangely quiet. As my men set about their task, I even heard him offer up a prayer. "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." I watched on as my lads cast lots at the foot of his cross for his garments. And as the rulers and the priests, even the thieves who were crucified either side of Jesus, mocked him, sneered him. "Save yourself. He saved others. Let him save himself. Come down from the cross. He will destroy the temple in 3 days and build it again. Let him save himself if he is the Christ, the chosen of God." At times I was wanting to get some of those folks by the neck and maybe string them up beside Jesus. It just wasn't right. My own mind was racing. So many questions. What had this man done to deserve this? Had he not taught his followers about love and forgiveness? If he was a king, where were his people? His bodyguards? His army? I only noticed 2 figures standing near to his cross, an older woman and a younger man, both of whom he briefly spoke. His mother and one of his friends, a fisherman from Galilee, I later learned. Probably ensuring his mother was looked after, such as was their custom. I rage at the high-born politicians, always scheming, just like Pilate. How could they allow this? Didn't this man once tell his people to love their enemies? Surely it should be with such a man that we Romans should be entering into a league with, helping to bring about civilization to this place. This awkward backwater of the empire. We shouldn't be killing this man. As I watched Jesus hanging there, our eyes met briefly. There was no hatred or bitterness in his eyes. Rather, compassion, love. It was as if he was staring into the very centre of my being. And although we exchanged no words, it was as if he was saying to me, "I'm doing this for you." I noticed that following a conversation between Jesus and the 2 thieves, that one of the thieves, his persona and attitude just changed completely. He became more like Jesus. It was approaching the 6th hour. The sun was to be at its highest in the day. It was sweltering. And then at that moment, it was like God had thrown a cloak over the sun. Darkness everywhere. I paused, then shouted out, "On me, lads!" I screamed. "Form square around the prisoners. Shields up, spears to the fore." training and discipline, the foundations upon which the Roman legion stood. My men could do these things and all these drills with their eyes closed. "All in," shouted the Optio. I expected an attack at any moment, but none came. There was only the groaning of the suffering prisoners, and the nervous jostling of feet and clinking of my lads' equipment to be heard. "It will just be a few moments, lads. It will pass." I'd heard of these things before. They only lasted moments. But this darkness endured. I cast my mind to the stories that I'd heard about the Hebrews' escape from Egypt. Wasn't darkness one of the plagues that their God had used? What do you expect next? Frogs? Flies? Boils? Was a heavenly being going to come flying through the air with a fiery sword and cut us all down where we stood? Strangely, I was relieved to recall that I had an older brother for some reason. Was he okay? The darkness lasted for about 3 hours. And then a shout from the cross above me, from Jesus' cross. My God, why hast thou forsaken me?" Had God used the darkness to shield something from our eyes? As suddenly as the light had disappeared, it returned once again. It was about the 9th hour. Jesus said he was thirsty, and one of the lads raised up a sponge soaked in vinegar to his lips. As I observed Jesus once again, was I mistaken? Did I see a sense of joy, satisfaction, or accomplishment on his face? I watched as he raised himself up and cried out, "It is finished," before his head fell forward toward his chest. Just then the earth began to shake. "Steady, lads, hold your ground." Although truthfully, I was thinking, this is it. Then, just as suddenly, the quaking stopped, in the ground at least. What was it I had just witnessed? Certainly, this Jesus was a righteous man. But more than that, truly this man was the Son of God. Shortly afterward, Pilate sent word to break the legs of the prisoners to hasten their death, as the Hebrews didn't want them lingering in their holy day. Optio reported that Jesus was already dead. I could see this was the case. A spear was thrust into his side, to be sure. Blood and water came flowing out. There was no doubt Jesus was dead. I reported this to Pilate personally a little later, and he marvelled at the fact. Men could last several days on the cross before they died. As it was, I had a strange sense that Jesus had endured something more than the savage beatings that was inflicted upon him, more than the crucifixion. Something else had happened during those hours of darkness. The greatest battle ever fought, the greatest victory ever won, not by me and the lads, you understand. I would hold that if all the legions were to fight this battle, we could not have prevailed. But this battle had been fought by that man on the centre cross, Jesus of Nazareth, the Son of God. Pilate later introduced me to a man from Arimathea who would take the body of Jesus and lay him in a tomb. And there followed, he said to me, "Could I spare some men to guard the tomb?" As the Jewish leaders were afraid his followers would steal his body and claim he had risen from the dead, as Jesus himself had said he would. As it happened, I had the 5 very men for the job. What happened next was every bit as amazing as was this day. But that is a story for another, or what would become known as the third day. God bless.